If you are 65 years old with less than $75,000 saved, you have probably already been told the plan. Work until you are 70, or get used to a much smaller life than the one you pictured. That advice skips over one number that changes everything: $24,480. That is the Social Security earnings test limit for 2026. If you already claimed your benefit and you go back to work, every $2 you earn above that limit pulls $1 out of your monthly check. It feels like a 50% tax, and for the roughly half of retirees who claimed early, it is the exact thing standing between them and a real rescue plan. Most rescue plans stop right there. Work more, spend less, hope the market behaves. But what if the plan you were handed is simply missing a piece? There is a second mechanism built into the Social Security rules that almost nobody explains correctly, something close to an undo button. Used the right way, it can turn a retirement that looks broken into one that pays out $45,000 a year for life. I want to walk you through this with a couple who felt exactly the way you might feel right now. Call them Jim and Sarah, 65 years old, $70,000 in savings, a $50,000 mortgage still hanging over their heads. On paper, that looks like trouble. They thought they were stuck too, until they found out the government already built a do-over into the system. This is not about grinding harder or cutting every bit of joy out of your budget. It is about knowing which levers the system already hands you and pulling them in the right order over the next 5 years. The 2026 earnings test limit sits at $24,480 a year. For every $2 you earn above that, the SSA holds back $1 from your check. That sounds like a penalty. It is not. It is a forced delay, and the SSA recalculates your benefit higher once you reach full retirement age, so nothing above the limit is actually lost. It just moves. Here is the part almost nobody hears the first time. Jim and Sarah were not really scared of the $50,000 mortgage. They were scared of wasting the one guaranteed check they had left. That is the real trap, not the size of their savings account, but the fear that going back to work would somehow burn the Social Security they were already counting on. I have watched people turn down good part-time work because someone told them it would cost them their Social Security. It does not work that way, and once people understand that, the fear usually drops fast. Jim picked up part-time work and earned $35,000 in a year. The limit was $24,480, so he came in $10,520 over it. At $1 held back for every $2 over, the SSA withheld $5,260 from his checks that year. On a bank statement, that looks like a loss. It is not. The SSA credits those withheld month back once Jim reaches full retirement age at 67, and his monthly benefit rises permanently to make up for it. The money did not vanish. It moved down the timeline and came back with company. The Social Security Administration confirms this every year in its official earnings test rules, and it is worth checking your own numbers against the current limit before you take on extra hours. Because that $24,480 threshold does move from year to year. There is a trade-off hiding in this too. Every year you turn down income to protect a check you may not even need yet is a year you are not closing the gap in your savings. The earnings test is not the enemy here. Sitting on your hands because you misunderstand it, that is what actually costs you. Most people never call the SSA to confirm how the recalculation actually works. They just assume the withheld money is gone for good. It is worth a phone call or a close look at your annual statement, because seeing the math confirmed in writing is often what finally convinces someone to go back to part-time work in the first place. But what happens if you already hit that wall, and your body is telling you that full-time work at 67 is not realistic? That is where the real leverage sits, in a rule most people have never heard of. Full retirement age for anyone born in 1960 or later is 67. Once you reach that age, there is a move buried in the Social Security rules that functions almost like a mulligan. You can tell the SSA to stop paying you, on purpose, even after you already started collecting. This is called voluntary suspension, and it is the closest thing to an undo button a government program has ever offered. For every year you suspend your benefit between 67 and 70, it grows by 8%, simple interest, permanently. I used to tell people that once you claim Social Security at 62, you are locked in for life. No way back. I was wrong about that. The suspension rule is not some workaround. It is written into the program on purpose, for exactly this kind of situation. This only works once you have reached full retirement age. If you claimed early, at 62 for example, you cannot suspend before 67. The rule opens exactly at full retirement age and stays open until 70. Jim and Sarah are not asking whether they can undo a decision from decades ago. They are asking whether the next 5 years can still change the outcome. This is one of the clearest ways they can. Say Sarah's benefit sits at $2,000 a month at 67. If she suspends it for 3 years and restarts at 70, that check grows to $2,480 a month. That is $5,760 more a year, and because it is Social Security, it is adjusted for inflation and paid for the rest of her life. That increase does not depend on the stock market having a good year, or on Jim and Sarah picking the right fund. It is guaranteed by law, which makes it one of the few raises in retirement you can actually plan around with confidence. The cost is obvious on the surface. 3 years without that check landing in the account. What people miss is the other side of it. What happens if you skip this and keep collecting the smaller amount for 20 or 30 years instead? Because that gap compounds every single year you are alive to cash the check. Requesting the suspension is simple in practice. You send the SSA a written request or handle it through your online account, and the change usually takes effect within a month or two. There is no medical exam, no new application, and no fee attached to any of it. For Jim and Sarah, the appeal is not just the extra 8% a year. It is the fact that they can change their mind again later if their health or their finances shift. Restarting the benefit at any point between 67 and 70, instead of being locked into one choice, made years earlier under different circumstances. If you are someone who started late and feels like the system was built against you, stick around and subscribe to Wes Investor. We are not here to sell you an annuity or a promise. We are here to show you how to use rules the government already wrote, the ones most advisors never bother to mention. Knowing the rule is one thing. Staying healthy and steady enough to actually use it the way you planned is a different problem entirely. The plan so far assumes Jim and Sarah can keep working steady hours for years in a row. Real life rarely cooperates that cleanly. Jim has a bad back that flares up under physical strain, and Sarah has started spending 2 or 3 days a week helping her aging mother. Somewhere around year 3, the standard advice of just work full-time quietly falls apart. Is that a failure on their part? Not really. Bodies wear out on their own schedule, and family needs do not check a retirement calendar first. A plan has to survive that reality, not pretend it will never happen. Here is where a 2025 tax change helps more than most people realize. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act added an extra $6,000 deduction for each person 65 or older, on top of the standard deduction for tax years 2025 through 2028. For a married couple where both are 65 or older, that is $12,000 shielded from taxes. That deduction phases out above $75,000 in income for a single filer, or $150,000 for a married couple filing jointly, numbers most retirees working part-time will never come close to. Which means Jim and Sarah keep more of every dollar they earn part-time, without needing to work as many hours to hit the same after-tax number they would have needed back in 2023, before this deduction existed. Picture the math on a rough month. Jim skips 2 weeks of work after his back flares up, and that is roughly $1,300 in lost part-time income. Under the old rules, that gap would have eaten into savings fast. Under the new deduction, the taxes he is not paying on the income, he does earn help cushion exactly that kind of month. The lesson here is not work harder through the pain. It is that the tax code just quietly made part-time work more valuable than it used to be, which buys Jim and Sarah room to scale back hours, instead of pushing through an injury or missing time with a parent who needs them. Nobody plans their 60s around a bad back or a parent who suddenly needs more help, and yet almost everyone ends up navigating something close to it. A plan that only works if nothing ever goes wrong is not really a plan. If you cannot count on working more hours every single year, you need another lever. The biggest one most people in their 60s are already sitting on is not a stock account. It is the house. Back in 2008, home values fell hard and fast, and a lot of Gen Xers watched their parents lose equity almost overnight. That memory still shapes how a lot of people in their 60s think about their house today, as something fragile you should not touch. The 2026 market looks nothing like that. Home equity across the country sits near record highs, even as cash savings for the same households stay thin. Fidelity's most recent estimate says a single person retiring today should plan for roughly $172,500 in healthcare costs over the rest of their life. For a couple, that number is closer to $345,000. Jim and Sarah have $70,000 saved total. That gap, roughly $275,000, is the real threat to their plan, more than any market downturn ever could be. This is where the house becomes useful without being sold. A HECM line of credit, a type of reverse mortgage available once you are 62 or older, lets Jim and Sarah borrow against their equity as they need it, instead of taking one lump sum they would owe interest on right away. Using that line of credit to pay off their $50,000 mortgage removes their $1,200 monthly payment completely. That frees up $14,400 a year in cash flow, money that used to go straight to the bank every month without Jim needing to work a single extra hour to find it. I know reverse mortgage sounds like a word to avoid, almost like admitting defeat. I am not saying it is right for everyone. But when you are $275,000 short on healthcare costs alone, the equity sitting in your house is a tool, not a trophy you are supposed to leave untouched. The reason this works is simple. A HECM line of credit only grows when you actually use it, and unlike a traditional loan, you are not required to make monthly payments while you live in the home. The interest gets added to the balance instead of coming out of your pocket each month, which is exactly the flexibility a 5-year rescue plan needs. That shift from treating the house as untouchable to treating it as one more account in the plan is often the hardest part of this whole strategy, harder than any of the math. It is not a decision to make quickly, and talking it through with a HUD-approved counselor before signing anything is part of how the program is designed to work. Knowing that room exists changes something else too, the way your mind reacts every time you check your bank balance. There is a quiet fear sitting under most of this. If you do not claim Social Security now, what if you do not live long enough to collect it? That fear has a name, loss aversion, and it pushes people to grab money early, even when waiting would leave them better off. That feeling is normal. You paid into this system for 40 years, through paycheck after paycheck, and the idea of leaving money on the table feels almost unbearable. Nobody should tell you that feeling is irrational, because it is not. The shift that actually helps is small. Stop thinking of Social Security as a bank account you are trying to drain before you die, and start thinking of it as longevity insurance, a check that protects you specifically in the years you might run out of everything else. With Jim and Sarah's $70,000, splitting it into 2 buckets does more for their stress level than any spreadsheet could. $20,000 sits as an emergency bucket for the car repair or the surprise bill. The other $50,000 becomes a healthcare peace of mind fund, untouched unless it is genuinely needed. Once that second bucket exists on paper, something shifts in how people make decisions. The brain stops scanning for the next disaster and starts focusing on the actual 5-year plan in front of it, the part-time work, the earnings test, the deduction. All of it gets easier to execute once the panic drops. This is not about being reckless with the $50,000. It is about giving your mind permission to stop treating every good year as the one you might not get to keep. There is no perfect account balance where this worry simply disappears. Even people with far larger savings than Jim and Sarah's carry some version of the same fear, because the fear is about certainty, not about the size of the number sitting in the account. Knowing the money and the buckets is one thing. Actually using them in the right order over the next 5 years is where most plans either hold together or fall apart. Here is the order Jim and Sarah actually used, and it works roughly the same way for most people starting this 5-year sprint. Step 1. Confirm your full retirement age. For almost everyone reading this, born in 1960 or later, that age is 67. This sounds basic, but plenty of people never actually confirm it. They just assume the age their older sibling or coworker used applies to them too. It might not. Step 2. If you are working before you reach full retirement age, stay under the $24,480 earnings limit for 2026, unless you are comfortable with part of your check being withheld and repaid later. In the calendar year you actually turn 67. That limit jumps to $65,160, so plan any bigger income years around that. Step 3. Claim the $12,000 joint senior deduction on your 2026 taxes if you are married and both 65 or older. That single move shields a meaningful chunk of your part-time income from tax as long as your joint income stays under $150,000. Step 4. Once you hit 67, look seriously at the undo button. If your health holds up and your savings can absorb a gap, suspending your benefit for even 1 to 3 years locks in that 8% annual raise for the rest of your life. None of these 4 steps require a product, a course, or anyone else's permission. They are already written into the rules you have been paying into your entire working life. Write these 4 steps down somewhere. You will actually see them again, a note on the fridge or a reminder in your phone, because the order matters almost as much as the steps themselves. There is one more trap waiting in the final year of this plan, and it has nothing to do with Social Security. It comes from Medicare, and it can undo part of what you just built if you are not watching for it. Jim and Sarah started this with $70,000 saved, a $50,000 mortgage, and a plan that looked fragile on paper. What actually changed their outcome was not a lucky investment or a big raise. It was learning how the earnings test, the senior deduction, and the voluntary suspension rule fit together over a 5-year window. If your numbers look like theirs did, you are not behind because you were careless or lazy. The rules around Social Security, taxes, and retirement have shifted more in the last few years than in the previous 2 decades combined. You are behind because the rules changed under you, and now you know how to change with them. None of this erases the stress of starting late. It just proves the stress is not the whole story, and that a rough starting position is not the same thing as a lost cause. Jim and Sarah did not need a windfall or a lucky break to get here. They needed 5 years, a clear order of operations, and the willingness to look closely at rules that felt intimidating at first glance. That is available to almost anyone reading this, regardless of how the last few years actually went. If this math gave you a little more hope than you had an hour ago, subscribe to Wes Investor. We are building a group of people who are done being sold fear and who would rather understand the actual rules than pay someone to guess at them for us. Retirement was never really an end date. It is a series of choices, made 1 year at a time, and the goal is simple. Make the choice that leaves you with the most options later.